I hired my best friend to watch my 3-year-old and 8-week-old when I returned to work after maternity leave. I just needed her for a few weeks until I found permanent childcare. First few days were great. I came home to a clean house and happy kids. On day 4, my husband calls me at work flipping out. He tells me he could hear the screaming as soon as he pulled into the driveway, and when he walked into the house there was food and dishes all over. Our oldest was crying in a corner, the baby was screaming from his crib, and my babysitter was yelling at everyone to shut the hell up. My husband had her leave immediately and tried to calm the children, but found the baby hadn't had his diaper changed in a long time. He was soaked with pee and poop was oozing out of his own izzy onto the pee-soaked crib. She had not used any of the breast milk in the fridge, so we do not know how she fed the baby, if she even did. My toddler was hysterical. We are still not sure what happened, but from what we could get out of him, she left him to do whatever he wanted to do unsupervised, and then when it came time for us to come home, she flipped out because of the mess and yelled at him. This, apparently, happened all 4 days she watched my kids and was only caught because my husband came home 30 minutes early on the 4th day. I never spoke to her again. I never confronted her, ignored her all calls and texts, and never talked about the incident again. All I could think about for months was my infant screaming from his bed for hours and being ignored all the while my toddler was terrified that I would return to work and he wasn't going to get to eat until I got home. I quit my job to stay home with them after that, and when I did go back to work they stayed with their Nana, great-grandmother, who spoiled the hell out of them and still does to this day. I will never let anyone outside of my family watch my children again. I had just began looking for a part-time sitter for my 3-year-old, who has a dozen food allergies. One woman came highly recommended, and after meeting with her multiple times and having my son interact with her, we decided to hire her. She swore up and down she could handle all his food allergies, and I provided all of his food, requesting that the few hours she has him, to not cook or eat his 3 anaphylactic allergies. Well, I got a call at work from her one day saying my son Neville had hives everywhere, so I went to pick him up. His dad and I got there and the babysitter was laughing, saying, "I was cooking eggs this morning and some spilled on the floor." Neville tried to pick them up and almost ate them. He is deathly allergic to eggs, and this woman was laughing about him almost eating his own death sentence. From the secondary reaction alone, he had facial swelling and hives. Needless to say, we never contacted her again. I was at a family holiday party at a family farm. About a mile from the farm, on the same property but out in the woods, is my great-aunt's house. Her granddaughter offered to babysit my 6-year-old and her 7-year-old brother at the house since it was more kid-friendly. I accepted and paid her. About an hour and a half goes by and I see granddaughter's car drive past us, towards the road. We call her and get a hold of her after 15 minutes to ask what she is doing. She tells us she's decided to go to a friend's house. Left my 6-year-old daughter and her 7-year-old brother alone in a house, a mile away from adults, in the middle of BFE, Missouri. The kids ended up being perfectly fine, but it just blew my mind that this 17-year-old accepted money to babysit and then just thought it was a-okay to leave 2 small children alone with no way to get to their parents but to trek through the dark woods. I need to warn everyone, this is a terrible thing that happened. This is not my story, it is my cousin's. What happened to her child made it so I never used a sitter, other than my mother and sister. In 1979 my cousin had a baby. No father in the picture. I know the details but they don't need to be told here. When her son was 2 months old she decided to go back to work. She did not need to, but, for reasons of her own, she insisted. She asked me to sit for him, but I was living at home with my parents, going to school full-time, and also had a nighttime job. My dad was dying of lung cancer and very sick at the time. She asked my mom, too, but due to my dad's illness she also said no. She then hired a licensed babysitter who had an ad in the paper. The first day at the sitter's he was injured. My mom was an emergency contact and the police called us before being able to find his mom. We were at the hospital when she arrived and it was just awful. He had been shaken severely, then had an injury with a skull fracture on the side of his head. They placed him in an induced coma for nearly a month. There were 2 surgeries, one to place a shunt, I can't recall the other. We sat with him continually, taking turns, singing to him, doing PT, touching him as much as possible. I cannot express how horrid this time was. He was permanently disabled. They lived close to my family and I spent time with him, to help with therapy. A PT would come daily and she trained us to help him. He eventually learned to walk and have a sort of okay life. He is mentally handicapped, usually he has a sunny disposition, but he also can be violent. He has trouble walking, and falls down easily. Such a tragedy. The aftermath for the extended family was not good. My aunt was extremely bitter that my mom, other aunts and I had not taken care of her grandson. These aunts were not young and had health issues, so I don't blame them. After some time of being accused of being the cause of the baby's injuries, she screamed at my mom. My aunt stopped speaking with us. Since my dad was in even worse shape, this was fine with us. We had stress enough of our own. The sitter was never charged with a crime. She tried to say that a 3-year-old girl she was sitting had pulled him off a bed onto the floor, but the girl's parents fought her on this. The girl was verbal and denied it. Then the sitter said that he had wiggled off the bed. Why place an infant on a bed where he could fall off? But the doctors were willing to testify it was a shaking injury. The sitter had a teen son in the house at the time and I wonder if maybe he did not do it. The doctor's theory was that the baby was crying very hard and in frustration either the sitter or her son shook him and then slammed him against a wall. It was his first time away from his mother, he was a breastfed baby, switched to formula in a bottle for the first time that day. Of course, he was probably crying, poor little thing. Hungry and scared with strangers who did not love him. Due to the insurance refusing to pay out if the injuries were caused by a criminal act, my cousin did not pursue a case against the sitter. She took the insurance money and went on with life. The sitter stopped sitting for a time, moved to another burb and began sitting again. My mom and my aunt stopped speaking. She is my last living aunt, 98 this year. I'm a sitter for at least 7 years. At some points I would have 3 families scheduled a week and worked in a preschool and I feel ashamed for a lot of these stories. I always put 110% into every job I had. That said, I had a little nightmare of my own. I met a single mom with a son about 8. She worked with troubled children and we had a pre-date night meeting where I met her and her son and she showed me around. There wasn't any red flags until it came time to leave where the boy insisted on showing me a crystal he had but could not find it. He started combing through the shag carpet searching for it and would scream if his mom tried to let me leave. Finally, as I'm saying, "Oh, it's okay, you can show me on the date night," he jumps up with a pebble in his hand and shows me. I leave and still agreed to the date night. The night came and just me and the kiddo. I tried to get him to eat dinner, but his eyes would glaze over any time I asked him to come to the table. Then he would intently watch TV without responding to a word I said, which I do not like TVs. I usually mention that to parents that I try to keep it off. I drew his bath and told him he could go bathe himself like his mother said, and he flipped. Screaming, kicking, the works. So I said if he doesn't bathe, it is bedtime. More screaming and kicking and hitting. I broke. I cried and texted the mom that she needed to come home because I couldn't handle being hit repeatedly. I called my mom and talked to her until the mom showed and he was passed out clothed on his bed. I didn't even want the money, but she insisted and I drove off never to see them again. I had a nanny come to the house 3 days a week while I worked in my basement. She was always taking the kids to the children's museum, like several times a week. I finally said something to her, "Wow, you must really like it there." Her answer, in the most bored and apathetic tone you've ever heard was, "Well, it helps to pass the time." That was her last day.